Hi everybody, today we're going to be talking about the art of arguing. I think sometimes people get arguing confused with having an opinion, or they think of argument like screaming and yelling. So I have this quote from Desmond Tutu: "Don't raise your voice, improve your argument." A lot of times, because we think about yelling and screaming and having an argument, which is a different use of the term. But really what we're talking about is persuasive writing. And there's a model that we're going to be using for this class that you can also sometimes use for your other classes as well. And I hope that it helps you to have a little bit better formula to do persuasive writing. So far, you've learned how to analyze an argument, and we looked at an author's audience, purpose, tone, evidence, and their use of rhetoric. And we talked for a while about how to use the three pillars, or how people use the three pillars of ethos, pathos, and logos. There we go. So we talked about ethos, which is arguments of ethics. We talked about pathos, which are appeals to emotion. And then we talked about logos, which is when you appeal to logic, right? And we also learned about how to incorporate material into essays with paraphrases, summaries, and quotation marks. We, in addition, especially focused for your last essay on logos, using logic to make your points. So that's what you learned, hopefully. When we were analyzing, this is just a little picture, summarizing reasons, assessing evidence, identifying perspectives. That was the tone and the point of view, investigating the author, looking at their authority behind what they're talking about. And one of the things the reasons, again, that I talked about that first, analyzing arguments, is because I wanted you to get used to thinking about how people argue, and I also wanted you to think about how to assess your evidence. So does this person have good evidence for their article? Should I use it in my essay? Do they have a lot of bias, or do they have a clear perspective? Does the author have authority? Are they an expert, or are they just some idiot who published something online? So what about your own argument? First, for this paper and for the next paper, you have to pick a side. You have to pick a side. It doesn't mean that you're merely going to look at things in black and white. People sometimes think of this: conservative versus liberal, or best of times, worst of times, good person or bad person. Yes, this is one way, this is the other way. But what it does mean is that you have to have a clear point of view before you dive into the writing process. So for example, if you're talking about something like, some of my examples in this PowerPoint are about homeschooling. I don't necessarily have to just say, people should be allowed to homeschool. Homeschool is the best way to do things. Or people should not be allowed to homeschool. Homeschooling is horrible. That's black and white thinking, right? What I could say is, people should be able to homeschool their children, but homeschooling curriculum should be regulated by the government to make sure that it is as rigorous as public and private school curriculum. That is a clear point of view, but it's not looking at something just in black and white terms. So to do this, really the key is that you have to read your sources critically and carefully. Annotate or make notes on what you read. This is a little bit too many notes maybe from this little picture we have here, but it's not bad to circle some key terms, highlight one or two sentences that have the main idea, write some notes like this in the margins to note main points, ask questions that you want to come back to later, and that kind of thing. And then keep notes of the important evidence so that when you go to write, you are ready to roll. It's not an opinion. I think Netflix is better than Amazon Prime. That is an opinion. In my opinion, smoking should be banned in public buildings. I hate this ban. I believe people should be able to smoke marijuana if they want to. All of those are opinions, but they're not actually arguments. What they are just statements based on, if you notice, a lot of these have first-person language. So it's saying, my opinion, I hate, I think, I believe. This is just how one person thinks. This is just one person's point of view. So how is this different from an argument? Because a lot of times when I teach argument, people will say, oh, that's just an opinion. And I'm like, no, it's not an opinion. I literally just said it's not an opinion. An opinion can be sort of the basis for an argument, but it's really just sort of how you feel about something, and it's based in feelings rather than logic or reasons. So I might say I don't like ketchup. That's not true. I love ketchup, but I might say I don't like ketchup. That's not really an argument. I can't persuade somebody else to not like ketchup too just because I don't like it. But if I said ketchup is made out of corn syrup and I don't want to eat corn syrup because it raises your blood sugar levels too quickly, now I start to have an argument. So an argument needs to be have reasons after the claim that you're making. So here's the opinions turned into argument. Instead of just saying, I don't like smoking, it should be banned. Smoking should be banned in public buildings because secondhand smoke can have detrimental health effects, and people who don't smoke should not be exposed to it. This is called having a claim and reasons. We're going to talk a lot more about this in a minute. So my claim here is smoking should be banned in all public buildings, and then I have the word because, and then here are my reasons. Number one, secondhand smoke has detrimental health effects, and number two, people who don't smoke shouldn't be exposed to those toxins. No one should listen to this band. Their song lyrics are unoriginal, the lead singer is off key, and the drummer can't keep a beat. So here I've got 1, 2, 3 reasons to help support my claim that no one should listen to this band. Netflix is cheaper than Amazon Prime. It has a wider selection, and it is easier to search through their offerings. Therefore, people should subscribe to Netflix. Here, I actually have my reasons first, and then my claim. But you'll notice that in this thesis, I still have both things. It's also 2 sentences, so was the one before, and that's okay. You can have a thesis that's 2 or 3 sentences long. Marijuana has already been legalized in several states. Since it can be used to help conditions such as depression and PTSD, it should be legalized here in our state as well. So here again, I have just a statement of fact. Marijuana has been legalized in several states. That's actually kind of like my first reason here. So I'll change that to a 2, and I'll change that to a 3. It's been legalized in other states. It can help with depression. It can help with PTSD. Therefore, it should be legalized. Again, here I've got my reasons and then my claim. So that's a lot different than just saying marijuana, I feel like people should be able to smoke marijuana whenever they want to, or saying I don't think marijuana should be legal. It turns your opinion into your argument. You'll notice too that none of these are written in first person. So having a little bit more formal tone shows people that you're being less biased. What's the difference? An opinion is based on how you feel. An argument has 3 parts: the claim, the reasons, and then the evidence. So we talked about claim and reasons. We're going to go over those a little bit more in this lecture, and then I'm going to have a separate lecture about evidence, just because it gets a little bit long, I think, if I talk about all 3. So focus on these 2 coming up. So step 1 is having your claim. Those are some of the things that I just showed you in our examples. Once you know your position, you need to write a clear claim, which is sometimes called a thesis statement. So, depending on who you have, if you take another English class after this, or if you're asked to write a persuasive essay later, you might have the instructor call it a claim or call it a thesis. I have this picture up here because sometimes you could have a broad or general statement and a general introductory remark before your thesis. Your thesis, having your claim first, and then your reasons, makes it more and more specific as we go. This is called the inverted pyramid. It means that I'm going to start broad, give maybe a hook to draw people's attention in, have your claim, then have your reasons, and then in each paragraph you're going to have little pieces of evidence to help support those. A claim states the overall position of the argument. Basically, what do I mean here? I mean that you're showing what side you're on. It should be in third person and not announcing. We talked about this before. I don't want a question. I want a statement. I don't want an opinion. I want an argument. And I don't want you to have an announcement, because an announcement isn't an argument either. It's just telling me what you're going to be writing about in your paper. So a poor example, I will be talking about the dangers of smoking and why smoking should be illegal. This is first person and it's an announcement. So here's a revision. Smoking should be illegal because of the dangers caused by both smoking and secondhand smoke. Here I've actually have my claim and the reasons. But if you just wanted to, you could have just this claim, and maybe you have different reasons for why you think smoking should be illegal, just as an example. So here are some examples of claims. Since casinos are legalized in New York State, high school curriculum needs to include information about gambling addiction in the same way drug and alcohol addiction are discussed. Here we have a clear claim. I know that the paper is going to be about gambling addiction, and I also know that it's going to be about curriculum and possibly drug and alcohol addiction, and have a little bit of a comparison there, right? There is no treatment for psychopathy or sociopathy. People with these conditions should be kept in prison for longer periods of time than other offenders. This is a very clear claim as well. You notice in these examples, I don't have the reasons yet. We're going to look at reasons in the second part of this. The best way to prevent bullying in schools is by hiring more psychologists and school counselors to give therapy to the children who are bullying others. This is a great claim, and it doesn't say something like, bullying in schools is harmful. That's not really a claim. That's not an argument. Everybody knows that bullying is harmful. But how we best prevent it, then you get into having an argument. So that's the other thing about the claim. It's not just stating a fact. It's taking a position on an issue. So step 2, after you have the claim, then you have the reasons. You need to back up your claim with reasons. These are statements of logic that are supporting your ideas. Sometimes you could think of answering the question why, and other times you can think of them following the idea because. So for example, if I go back, why should people with who are psychopaths be kept in jail longer? Because, and then you would kind of fill that in, right? How can we prevent bullying in schools? It's similar. It's not answering the why, but it is answering the how. So here is our claim from before. Smoking should be illegal. Why? Why should smoking be illegal? 1, cigarettes are addictive. Smoking cigarettes causes cancer, emphysema, and heart disease. Those are really 3 reasons, but I'm going to mark it just as number 2. Secondhand smoke can harm those with allergies and asthma. 3. So now I have 3 reasons, 3 pieces of logic to support my idea that smoking should be illegal. I would expect if someone had this in their introduction, that the first part of their paper would talk about nicotine addiction, The second part of their paper would talk about diseases like cancer, and the third part of their paper would talk about secondhand smoke. So one of the things that you can do with your reasons is you use it kind of like a map for your paper. Meaning that, or a GPS, I guess, if you want to talk about it that way. I'm showing how old I am right now. Get out your map, kids. A GPS for your paper. So it's basically saying, like, I'm going to take you from point A to point B to point C, right? That's how organization can really be helped in your paper if you have a very strong introduction. If you don't have a strong introduction, your paper's probably going to be a mess. I've been teaching college for 10 years, and I can tell you if you don't have a good introduction, the rest of your paper is not going to be organized well. So here's another claim. Smoking should remain legal. Here are the person's reasons. Number one, people have personal freedom to use certain substances. Just as banning alcohol did not work, banning tobacco will not work either. There's a little bit more there, but it's kind of being cut off here by the where I have the screen capture. So here we only have two reasons, but I would expect that the first part, the writer would talk about personal freedom, why it's important to have personal freedom, why we can do certain things outside of government control. And then I would expect that since they mention banning alcohol, that they would talk about prohibition a little bit, the problems with prohibition, how banning tobacco would cause taxpayers a lot of money in enforcing it, just like prohibition caused taxpayers a lot of money to try to enforce banning alcohol as well. Again, two really good reasons and a clear claim. Oh, every cigarette we smoke makes fatty deposits stick in our gross. I forgot I put that in there. Sorry, guys. So, this is how you get a gold medal paper. Having a claim plus your reasons for your thesis statement. If you only have your claim and you don't have reasons, it's going to be very unclear where your paper is going and why you're making the argument. If you just have reasons without a clear claim, it's not going to be clear to your reader what side of the argument you're choosing. So here's one example. Juvenile offenders who commit murder should not be tried as adults. That's my claim. Now, you might ask the question, as I did here, why? Why should they not be tried as adults? One, because children's brains are not fully developed. They may not be fully responsible for their actions, and they should not be put into prison with an adult population. So this is from a student essay that I got, and I was like, don't use the word fully twice. 1 and 2 were kind of connected, but I still think that in his paper, he was kind of able to discuss those two things separately. So they're pretty good. They're pretty good reasons. You might ask the question here, why should they not be put into prison with an adult population? But really, this is something that he answered in the rest of his essay with evidence from his resources, which we'll talk about in the other video, how to do evidence. So here's another claim. SeaWorld needs to be closed down. What are the reasons? One, the organization has a history of cruelty to animals. Due to poorly regulated facilities, several animal trainers have been injured or killed. So here we're focusing first on the animals and then on their trainers, so then on the people. And I would expect that, again, one of the things to remember is that when you're breaking down these reasons into your essay, this is going to be a section talking about this, not just a paragraph. The person who wrote this essay for me had a paragraph about orca whales, a paragraph about, I think she had a paragraph about parrots, if I'm not mistaken. She had a paragraph about the birds that were in SeaWorld that were also being mistreated. She had a paragraph about dolphins. And then she had another paragraph about how animals were being kidnapped from their homes in the sea, how some of them were being killed when they were being transported, that kind of thing. So that is something to keep in mind when you go to write. It's not just like you're going to have one paragraph for each reason. You're going to have many pieces of evidence for a reason, and you're going to have one paragraph for each piece of evidence. So when you did shorter essays in high school, you might have just had one paragraph, but now you're going to really focus on having a paragraph for each piece of evidence and having longer sections for each reason. So here's some more examples. People should be allowed to homeschool their children. Homeschooling allows parents to tailor education to their child's needs. Homeschool encourages children to love learning. Parents should have the freedom to give children religious instruction, and children can avoid bullying and violence at public school. For very good reasons. And the person who wrote about this topic would probably have a couple paragraphs, maybe 2 or 3 paragraphs for each one of those reasons. But it's a really clear way to list them in the introduction. Here's on the other side. People should not be allowed to homeschool their children. Homeschools are not academically rigorous. Children are unable to properly socialize. Homeschools are not regulated properly by the government. And parents who homeschool may secretly be abusing their children. Now, one of the things actually that happened, I got an essay on this topic, and the person had really had too much on this one point and really not as many on the other points. So one of the things you want to remember when you actually go to write your essay is the idea of balance. If you have 3 or 4 reasons, you should really have the same amount or a similar amount of evidence for each one. It looks like a serial killer wrote it. Sorry, my pen's weird. Sorry. Introduction example. So here's what not to do. Compulsive gambling happens when a person compulsively gambles. I forgot I used this example. Compulsive gambling happens when a person compulsively gambles. Compulsive gambling is an activity that could have significant negative effects on an individual. Gambling addictions can lead to significant negative family and employment issues. The activities of a compulsive gambler can put an individual in significant negative financial issues, jeopardize relationships, and create difficulty with their job. So what's wrong here? Well, right off the bat, you can probably see compulsive gambling happens when a person compulsively gambles. Doesn't really give me a good definition. It's an activity that could have significant negative effects. And then we have here significant negative issues. The other thing, too, is that family and employment is very similar to financial issues and jeopardizing relationships and creating difficulty with their job. So one of the problems here really is repetition. So instead of having that first thing, it's not a good definition. What does compulsive mean? Why does it happen? How can it be stopped? That's really what I wanted to know there. There's also no real hook to kind of draw your interest in. Compulsive gambling can have significant negative effects. That's actually a good, solid claim. It's not as strong of a claim. I mean, you're just saying like compulsive gambling is bad, which is sort of a fact, right? But it's using also language that's repeated below. They're not bad reasons about family and about employment or finances, but the language is quite repetitive. So here is the paragraph revised. Many people don't know that gambling can become an addiction similar to alcohol or drugs. Unlike casual gamblers who stop when losing or set a loss limit, people with a compulsive gambling problem are compelled to keep playing to recover their money, a pattern that becomes destructive over time. So this is much more clear now, the difference between casual gambler and someone who is compulsive, meaning that they're compelled to do something. This addiction is called compulsive gambling and is an activity that has negative effects on the individual. Gambling addictions can lead to family and employment issues. The activity can cause the addict to struggle financially, jeopardize relationships, and struggle from suicidal thoughts and depression. So here we have 3 good reasons to not gamble, right? According to James Franklin of The Atlantic, significant portion of casino revenue comes from a small percentage of customers, most of them addicts. Since casinos encourage this type of addiction, they should not be allowed in New York State. This is a better introduction paragraph than what he had before. I told him really that the quote from James Franklin, I think, could have been better in the beginning. And I think that really, if this is the claim, which it was for his paper, struggling financially, jeopardizing relationships, and suicidal thoughts don't necessarily relate to the idea of casinos specifically. They're more specific to the idea of gambling. So it's better, but I think it could have been revised even a step further. If we had really started with the quote from James Franklin and then had the claim and then had 3 reasons about how casinos encourage addiction, that would have really been a stronger opening. And to be honest, you can't see the whole paper, but it would have made for a stronger paper as well. I think the paper focused a lot on addiction and just telling and informing people about addiction, and it didn't have as much of an argument. So let's look at another one, what not to do. This actually is from a paper. I think her original draft got like maybe a B or a B plus. It actually was not bad, but there's still some things that we can improve. For many years, bullying has been an issue of concern in almost every place. Bullying refers to aggressive behavior, which is usually characterized by an imbalance of power and repetition of behavior. It is a problem that starts at a very early age. The acts of bullying can either be physical or verbal, or include exclusion, cyberbullying, and baseless violence. Now, I'm going to stop just here just to tell you kind of what she does well. Bullying refers to aggressive behavior, imbalance of power, repetition. That's actually something I did not know about bullying. And you notice she gives a really good definition, but she doesn't use the dictionary. The other thing is that she kind of continues this definition. So she talks about physical, verbal, exclusion, cyberbullying, baseless violence. All of those are pretty important to the definition. The problem really is right here, because this is not really a hook. But we'll kind of continue. So the effects of bullying can be long-term or short-term, but cases of children taking their own lives have been reported often. Parents seem more concerned about work and other adult responsibilities than what is going on in their child's lives. Therefore, they fail to see cries for help from their children. The effects of bullying can be adverse, like depression and suicide, and it is high time that the causes and solutions to these problems are identified and prevented. So here she kind of has a claim, but kind of similar to the last paragraph that we looked at. It's much more informative and much less of an argument. So what went wrong? Again, she doesn't really have a hook. She has 2 good points and a clear definition and good reasons kind of to support that definition, or details to support that definition. They fail to see the cries from of help from their children is cited, but it doesn't really need to be there. And then she didn't have a clear thesis that showed me that she was making an argument and not just doing an informative essay about bullying. So here is the revision. She added a new hook at the beginning. According to recent research, over 50% of people who experienced extreme bullying as children experienced symptoms of PTSD as adults. That's from the exact same source that she had before, but now it's much more clear and much more interesting. New thesis at the end. Instead of just saying that people need to be identified, here's what she said. Current school programs are ineffective in dealing with bullying. More needs to be done to identify victims and get both victims and perpetrators the help they need. And then when she had And she had the reasons in the previous paragraph, but now we have a much more clear claim. And then the rest of her essay, she really talked about each type of bullying and how a school program could prevent that type of bullying. So how schools and school psychologists could help people who were doing cyberbullying, how they could help people who had been victims of physical bullying, how they intervened with people who were doing exclusion and emotional bullying and that kind of thing. So it was a much better thesis that helped to guide the rest of her argument. All right, so this is going to come up next. Oh, sorry. This is coming up next. I'm going to pause for right here, and then later today or possibly tomorrow, you can take a look at proving a claim and reasons by using evidence, how to support your argument once you get past the introduction. And we'll talk a little bit more about the body paragraphs that have evidence. And then there's a third PowerPoint about how to do better conclusions. So instead of just doing a summary, what you can do instead. That's it. I look forward to reading your arguments, everybody. Have